Pop-ups and drive-bys. I'm sure all of you have encountered pop-ups and pop-up ads while you're browsing the web, and some of these pop-ups can be harmful and they can trigger downloads and install viruses and so on. Some of them can also be disguised as system messages or warnings. And in Windows 10, there is a great program called the Windows Defender, which helps catch these and quarantine and protect your system from that. So there are different levels and there are different options that you can choose in this program, and that helps keep the system clean and safe. There are also third-party software like Malware, Adaware, Spybot, Search and Destroy, and so on. So these are the three main popular ones, and Malware is pretty popular in terms of Malware is free for personal use, and it's usually the one that's everyone uses. And of course, email can contain a lot of these same threats as well, because you are essentially downloading the email message, and that can have attachments, and those attachments can contain a virus or a Trojan horse and so on. A lot of those are already detected and cleaned if you're using something like Gmail or any other popular web-based email service. But if you're running your own email server, or if you have a corporate email that you're using that's not any of these bigger ones, then you'll have to set up and manage your own spam filters as well as the antivirus and anti-malware software at the server level. So these are some of the signs and symptoms that you might see if there is something wrong with the system or if there is some sort of a malware. Usually the first thing that happens is the system slows down. So the system slows down for other reasons as well, for just day-to-day use and wear and tear, but in this case you'll see a significant slowdown and you might see that there is something wrong. There might also be crashes and some other abnormal behavior that's happening. You might see some more blue screens and more applications just shutting down for no reason. This is a very specific case where you might be getting responses from other users, and especially your colleagues or people that you usually communicate with by email or by SMS, that you are sending messages to them that are suspicious. And in this case, it's actually you're not sending anything, it's just the malware or the virus that resides on your machine that's sending out to all your contacts. The Windows Update feature might stop working, so in this case the updating Windows will always keep your system safe and secure from these zero-day attacks and other security vulnerables. So a lot of the virus and malware will try to stop you from updating. You might lose connectivity, either locally or to the internet. Your web browser might be forwarding the URL to another URL. So instead of going to, if you type in Wikipedia, you might be going to another URL, or it might look like you're going to Wikipedia, but it might be spoofing another URL. And if you're checking your logs and your system as well as application logs, you might see some unexpected entries, and you might see, and if you're using Mac, you might look at the console and you might see some errors and some other unexpected items there that will indicate that there's something wrong with the system. So if you do find malware and you want to recover the system from that, so these are the steps that are recommended from A+ themselves. So these are the 7 steps that you may want to learn or memorize for the exam as well. So the first step is to identify and research the malware symptoms. Then you can quarantine the infected systems. So within Malwarebytes or Windows Defender, there is a quarantine function that will quarantine the files and folders that were initially infected. So sometimes you may need to keep the files and folders and investigate further. You want to disable the system restore in Windows, and then you want to update the anti-malware software. so that all the definitions are up to date. You want to scan and remove any of the bad files. So you want to do that in safe mode or in a pre-installation environment. Then you want to schedule scans and run updates once the system is clean. And then you want to enable the system restore and then create a restore point. That is if you're in Windows. And then you want to educate the end user about what happened and document the issue. Now, one thing to note is that malware infections can do a lot of damage to the system, especially to the sensitive files and to the system files in Windows. So you'll have to remediate that as quickly as possible and also make sure that everything is running correctly. So if you can't start Windows sometimes after the malware scan is done, then you'll need to boot into the pre-installation environment and then run the recovery from there. Some further steps for the malware recovery: you want to make sure that you have a lot of backups and be able to restore from multiple sources or from multiple points depending on when or where the attack actually came from. You also want to recognize and quarantine, which is to evaluate the cause of the attack and figure out how to prevent it. And then finally, the system recovery options that's in the pre-installation environment has a lot of different tools in Windows and not just being able to restore the system. Firewalls are a good way to prevent bad things from happening in the first place. They protect the internal network from unauthorized access to and from the internet typically. Firewalls use a number of different methods to protect the networks, and usually one of them is by hiding the IP addresses and blocking different TCP and IP ports. Hardware firewalls are usually built into routers, and software firewalls are run on the computers. Both of these firewalls protect the computer and the network, and you can usually run both of them at the same time. Firewalls also use the stateful packet inspection to inspect each incoming packet individually. Now, a router can also act as a firewall if it's built into the NAT, which is the network address translation. The port forwarding is another feature of the firewalls that allows you to open certain ports or close certain ports and then have control over what kind of data or what kind of connections are coming into the network. Now, the port forwarding feature allows you to forward the incoming connection to a different port than the one that it's actually requesting. So that way you're actually hiding the port here. There's something called a demilitarized zone, or a DMZ, which puts systems with specific IP addresses outside of the protection from the firewall. So this allows them, or that machine or a set of machines, to have all the ports open and functioning on them. Software firewalls come with the operating system. So Windows and Mac come with their own firewall, and in Windows case, that's part of the Windows Defender. So the Windows Defender firewall has a separate set of settings that you can choose to turn on or off the firewall, and it's recommended that you keep it on. And once it's on, you can decide how granular you want those settings to be in terms of, do you want to be notified for every incoming connection, or do you want to automatically block all incoming connections except for the ones that you predefined and allowed, and so on. Now, in addition to the firewall, there is an IDS and an IPS. An IDS is the intrusion detection system, which is an application that inspects packets and it looks for active intrusions. So this sits inside the network and it can detect threats that are coming from inside the network as well. The IDS can't stop the attacks directly, but the IDS can't stop attacks directly, but they can notify the administrators or the support personnel. Now, the IPS is slightly different. It sits directly in the flow of the network traffic, and it can actually stop an attack while it's happening. Now, that comes at a price, which is the bandwidth and the latency can be affected. Because it's sitting right in the flow of the traffic, so it's actually inspecting things in real time, so that's going to cause some slowness. So some of the firewalls that we see these days provide something called the UTM, which is a Unified Threat Management. So they provide a full service of both the IDS and the IPS. Now when you're working with the Windows Defender firewall, there are certain keywords and key terms that you can use that define whether a network is trusted or not. So these are the definitions that are provided by Microsoft, and these have been around for a few versions of Windows. So initially you can identify based on the domain, private, guest, or public. A domain network is a Windows network that's controlled by Windows Domain Controller that runs Active Directory domain services. And in this case, the domain controller tells the machine that it can or cannot accept other connections and what you can and can't share. So in this case, you don't need to do anything except just joining that network with that domain. Now, a private network enables you to share resources, discover other devices, and it also allows other devices to discover your computer. And finally, a guest or a public network. So these are untrusted networks, and these prevent your computer from sharing and disables all network protocols. So the first time when the computer connects to a network, Windows will prompt you to choose the network type, and Windows 7, it pretty much tells you straight away home, work, or guest, or the public location. In Windows 10, it's slightly different, and it asks if you want to allow other devices on the network to discover your PC or not. So if you say yes, then it will mark the network as private, and if you say no, then it will mark the network as public.
For more details, check the link in the description. Learn with Whizlabs. Success certified.